Pleased to be here today to talk about the Orphan Drug Act. The Orphan Drug Act is a very important bill and what it's done for the rare disease community in many different ways. But I also want to talk about one of the key aspects I consider in this, which is the relationship of the Orphan Drug Act to prices and incentives. So an incredibly successful law, right, with so many drugs getting developed, but also successful because it made the community aware of itself and formed it as an entity and began thinking that way. Certainly the benefits of the bill were very important, but the truth was that, in fact, the Orphan Drug Act was really enough for the work I was doing on a rare disease, and so what I'm going to tell you today is the story of that disease. I think it's a model for the situation we're in. It's extremely important to understand that the Orphan Drug Act was not because of high prices, but that the high prices were, in fact, ultimately became the incentive that allowed some of the drugs to get developed. So the alternatives would be that storyline we'll talk through. Now, this is my beginning. This is where you, as an orphan scientist, you're born a poor orphan in a World War II era bungalow with no money, and you start working on a disease called MPS I. Terrible rare disease, but the most important is only 100 in the world. But at that moment in time, science was right to actually treat this disease. And I started working that science and studying this terrible disease that affects all over the whole body of these patients in many different ways. Very complicated disease. But the science was right to being able to replace the enzyme these patients were missing. An enzyme missing that would potentially restore their function. However, you need to make this enzyme, which is not normally an academic project, but something maybe a company would do. But that was my project. And in a time when there was no orphan drug companies, I started a laboratory there to make the enzyme. I got all used equipment. Usually the great place was the cancer center. We're always throwing away equipment that I could get for free. Get your truck there, pick up stuff, set it up, start figuring out a way to make some enzyme, which we did, and the enzyme was successful in treating the dog model. But then we came up against a problem. The therapy should work in the dogs, as we've shown, but who's going to develop this for people? And you need to make large amounts of this enzyme in the right way for people. It required certainly large-scale production, but most importantly, it required large-scale money, I realized, and there was no NIH grant, there was no situation to fund this kind of thing. So, as I was trying to do this, my academic chair told me, if you try to do this, make this enzyme and treat these patients, you could ruin your academic career, spending all your time and money trying to do this and get nowhere because it was beyond your ability. It did ruin my academic career because I left academia and went to industry. But that's not what he was thinking. So I went searching for a company, and so this is 1993. Now this is years, a decade after the Orphan Drug Act, right? I went around talking to companies. Now I was not a businessman. I was just basically an academic guy. I had some good science, and I couldn't get anyone to really talk to us too much about it. But Marlene Hacker connected me up with someone at Orphan Medical, this company called Orphan Medical. I thought, oh great, a company focused on orphan diseases. I brought this to them, and they said, no, it's too orphan for us. It was too orphan for the orphan drug company. It was too complicated, too difficult to make. No matter how good the science was, it required investment that was going to be tens of millions of dollars, and there was just no way to get anyone to do it. Even Genzyme wouldn't do it. And at that point, they'd just gotten Ceridase approved. And the reason that's important for this venue here is at that time, they got approved and charged $200,000 or $300,000 a year. And everyone was up in arms, and there were congressional investigations. They were attacked and beaten up. At the time I went to see them, they were already, bruised and battered by all that attack. And they actually turned away from rare disease stuff. And a lot of people don't realize Genzyme did not develop another rare disease drug for 11 years. After Ceridase. 11 years they stopped because of the attack on the pricing. Although when it was investigated, it turned out it was found to be justified, even though it was crazy expensive. So they sent me this letter. I just showed documentation. All right, thank you for your study. Maybe we can help you in some small way. They're trying to be kind, and they did look at this, but there's no chance. So I realized at this point,
oh, now we're like really stuck because no one wants to help, but are we going to walk away or not? Fortunately, the family, Mark Dant is here today, the Ryan Foundation kind of provided the money to keep us afloat, and the inspiration of the kid who was affected, and we were trying to save Ryan. We kept going, but it was really still not quite enough to actually get to the clinic. But we were trying, and we were going to do our best, and I had the plan to try to do it. But by 1997, after a few years of support from the Ryan Foundation, something changed. And what changed was that the Ceridase product, which had been reviled and attacked, was actually doing pretty well because it was life-changing and people wanted it. And they were using it in the US, they were using it ex-US, and it started earning money, ended up making more than $500 million that year. And when this happened, then other investors said, oh, maybe it is possible that we can invest in something as rare as MPS I. Maybe that's plausible. If that price point holds, then we can make it work financially. We can spend the tens of millions. That's what changed. At that point, BioMarin got funded, which picked up the project and funded us, which took us to approval. Oops, I went too far. So what I want to point out to the group very clearly is that the Orphan Drug Act, certainly, in the early 80s, but there was a gap of time when there were mostly existing small molecules, orphans. Drug companies made drugs and they kind of dropped them, right? That was kind of the concept, and they were orphaned by their company. But the development of complex new biologics that cost a lot of money, that wasn't happening. In the time of Ceridase, that was a heroic effort that occurred. And then about 4 or 5 years after Ceridase, when everything started to happen. So this is why I wanted to clear, look at the time scale of what's happening and when, to really be clear what was the motivator, what allowed this to happen. And I'm not saying high prices are great and we can afford every drug we could possibly make that way, but what I am saying to you is that the incentives are different. The orphan drug didn't create the prices, but the prices created the orphan drugs. So the orphan drug was able to support aldurazyme development, and this is, I think, really a critical factor in making this work. So I just caution people to think harder about how they deal with pricing versus innovation and how the act works. The orphan drug is not the cause of the high prices, but managing pricing is very, very tricky. And you just look what happened in the antibiotic world, where they hammered them on pricing, crushed the field, and basically killed the antibiotic development of antibiotics. That's not that hard to actually switch and hurt this thing. And the truth is, MPS I got approved, but there's still so many diseases that have no drug. They're not worried about prices, they're worried about finding the drug. We just got to make sure we're doing the right thing, because the truth is, you want to get here, this is the first infusion picture. We treat a kid for the first time. That's an amazing moment. But even more amazing is this, where the trial works and you're actually changing a terrible disease that no one thought would ever get treated. Thank you.